See, how many of you in here talk to yourselves? I see a few hands go up. But I always hear this kind of chuckle, and it's always the people in the back sitting there thinking, this guy's crazy. I don't talk to myself, but look at all these other people. Do you know what? We all talk to ourselves. And do you know when we talk to ourselves? Constantly. Whenever we're not talking to another physical, we talk to ourselves. How many of you, in fact, how many of you would be rather embarrassed if other people were like allowed to listen in on your self-talk? Is most of our self-talk positive, building, moving us towards productive futures? No. Most of our self-talk is just meaningless chatter in the background. Oh, here we go again. I can't believe it. Oh, my God, I can't believe it. Not him again. Oh, her again. Oh, God. It's just this nonstop banter. What I'm going to ask you to do from this point on is I'm going to ask you to think about words as being the single most powerful tool you will ever take ownership of. The way you talk to other people, certainly, and that has a lot to do with the engagement component that we talked about earlier. But think about how you talk to yourself. How many of you have ever made a mistake and then were beating yourself up for that same mistake 6 months later? You relive it. You go back, God, I can't believe I was so stupid. And you get in full Technicolor, you get the full picture, and you even feel just as lousy then as you did 6 months ago. We keep ourselves captive by those things. Do you know, here's another term to toss out at you. How many of you have heard of the term neuroplasticity? Anybody ever hear of neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to rewire itself. And here's what we now know. Did you know that people just by virtue of what we focus on, we can physically change the wiring structures in our brains almost up until our 80s. We'll talk about this in the next topic in a second. But in most cases, words will do two things. Words will either predict the future or they will perpetuate more of the past. And for most of us, what do you think we do with them? We perpetuate more of the past. So what I'm going to ask you to do is think about, and to show you, by the way, to show you how powerful this is, I want to share a kind of funny little anecdote. There's a story of an older gentleman. His name is Earl. And Earl walks in to his family practitioner one day. He hasn't had a physical in years. And Earl's getting up there in age. Let's just say Earl is in his 90s. And he walks in to see his doctor one day, and he says, Doc, you got to help me. Doctor says, well, Earl, I haven't seen you in a while. What's going on? He says, Doc, I feel lousy. He says, look at me. He says, I got tingling in my right arm down here. My right leg is kind of numb a little bit. I have no color in my face. I look like a ghost. And oh, by the way, I got a buzzing in my ear too. The doctor said, Earl, it sounds like you've got some issues. He says, well, but let's not jump to any conclusions. He says, let's give you a complete physical and see what we can figure out. So the doctor has Earl go through a full physical because he hasn't had one, and Lord knows he needed one. And he, he's taking copious notes down and asking him questions and writing his responses down. And then he says, "Okay, Earl." He says, "I think I've got my hands around this." He says, "I'm going to go out. I'll come back in. I'll let you know what I think." So doctor goes out and he comes back 5 minutes later. Earl's dressed again. And, "All right, Doc, give it to me straight." He says, "Earl, truth is you're old." "Well, I know that, Doc. He says, "Is there any good news?" He says, "Well, of course there is." He says, "Look," he says, "I'm going to give you a list of things that I think you can try to do that I think will improve the quality of life for however many years you have left." So the doctor, he kind of goes through his 4 or 5 things and sends Earl on his way, and wasn't really sure whether it would make a difference or not. Well, about 2 weeks go by, and the doctor is out walking in the downtown area of his town, and he sees Earl across the street, walking the other direction down the sidewalk, only Earl wasn't walking like this, like he'd come in. Earl was strutting. And why not? He had a younger woman in her 70s under his arm. And the doctor is absolutely floored. He's like, this can't be. And he says, "Earl, is that you?" And he says, and Earl adjusts his glasses, and he says, "Why, hey, Doc, why, yes, it is. And by the way, this is my lady friend, Ethel." He says, "Ethel, how are you?" He says, "Earl," he says, this is amazing. He says, "Look at you." He says, "What do you mean, Doc?" He says, "Earl, when you came into my office 2 weeks ago, you could barely stand up and you were complaining about everything." He says, "What have you done?" And Earl thinks, he says, "Well, Doc, I'm just just doing what you told me to do. And the doctor's thinking really, really hard. He says, Earl, what did I tell you to do? Well, you said get a hot mama and be cheerful. He says, no, Earl, I said you've got a heart murmur. Be careful. It's all in how you hear it, right? It's all in how you hear it. As I said before, words are the single most powerful tool you'll ever deploy.